Hey, if you're a fan of Queensryche, then I've got a cool video for you today. Now, what I've got here is this is a newspaper article from 1991 that's actually kind of an interview with Michael Wilton. Now, we did a Queensryche video just a couple of weeks ago, and you're thinking, why am I doing another Queensryche video today, and why specifically about Michael Wilton? Well, here's why. A lot of people on this channel have been asking, hey, have you seen this movie? Did you go to this concert? Have you seen this band? And I thought, you know what? I don't go to concerts a lot these days. And I think I need to do that more just as part of this channel. And so tonight I'm actually driving down to Las Vegas because Queensryche is playing down in Henderson. Now, this creates kind of an interesting question. And before I read this to you, because I think you're actually going to really find this article interesting. There's a couple of things in here I didn't know. And I've been a fan of Queensryche for a long, clear back from when the EP came out. I've been into them since way back then. But the question that this brings up is when does a band stop being a band? And I'd really like to get your feedback on this, because going to see Queensryche tonight, which I'm going to go do down in Las Vegas, there's really only two guys that were on this album. I'm going to flip it over here so you can see it. There's only two guys in the band today, the Queensryche, that were on this album. You've got Eddie Jackson and Michael Wilton, and that's it. These other three guys are not part of the band anymore. And so you have this question that's becoming more and more of an issue these days. And I'd really love to get your feedback on this, because I think we need to do a show or multiple shows about this. Like, what makes the band after you lose so many members? And what really got me thinking about this was a few weeks ago, somebody sent me a video of Kelly Hansen, because Kelly Hansen has been singing for Foreigner for something like 20 years. And they sent me this video where they're performing this song, and right in the middle of the song, Kelly Hansen makes this announcement, hey, I'm retiring from Foreigner, and this is going to be the new singer. And I thought, wait a second. You're already not the original singer. Lou Gramm was the singer of Foreigner when Foreigner started. And the reason Foreigner is called Foreigner was based on the guys that were in the band, because you had three guys that were from the United States and three guys that were from Britain, and you bring those guys together, and the idea was wherever they travel, at least half the band is going to be foreigners. But the band Foreigner, even though it was the actual name of the band was based on the members of the band, none of those guys are even members of the group anymore. And now you're a couple of generations away from Lou Gramm not being in the band. And now they're announcing a new singer. So you literally have a band, Foreigner, that had all these hits, huge hits back in the 70s and 80s, that it's not even that group anymore. And it's an interesting discussion, because then you start thinking, well, is it Foreigner? Can you really call it that? But we were introduced this idea going all the way back to like the Rolling Stones, when Brian Jones passed away. And then all of a sudden we started seeing this revolving door of members coming in and out of that group. And they're not the first ones, but I mean, that was kind of a big deal back in those days to lose that guy that was such a key member of that group, and then just kind of keep moving on, and then as different people have passed away and changed, and when is it really the Rolling Stones? And you think, okay, well, as long as it's got these core members, but then you have other things that make it even weirder, like Fleetwood Mac, for example, because Peter Green was originally in Fleetwood Mac. They had hits as Fleetwood Mac with him in the band. He leaves the band, and then you get Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, who join the band, and then they become even bigger. And so even though the original singer is gone, they bring in these new guys, and so now the classic version of Fleetwood Mac isn't even the original version of Fleetwood Mac. And where I really kind of got a vision of this was, I went to a concert years ago, and it was Warrant, okay? But Warrant, back, I don't remember when this was, but at some point, Janie Lane had left the group, and I believe this was before he passed away, but Jamie St. James had come in and was singing for Warrant. Now, I knew who Jamie St. James was because I'm a Black and Blue fan. He was the singer for Black and Blue, by the way, in case you didn't know, which is Tommy Thayer's original band. That's how he met Gene Simmons in the first place and ended up in the band Kiss. Okay, that's a whole nother story. But so I knew that, so I saw Warrant was coming to town. This is long after their heyday. And I saw them in this little nightclub, and I swear there weren't 50 people coming to see these guys. Well, and Jamie St. James was singing. And I didn't care that much about Warrant, but I was super excited to see Jamie St. James because he was a singer for Black and Blue, and I love Black and Blue. So I brought one of my Black and Blue records, hoping, since I knew there weren't going to be many people there, that I'd get him to sign my record. So I had this really kind of funny experience. And what it was after the show was over, they went to some folding tables in the back of the room where they were going to sign some autographs. Well, before they came out, there were a group of people, like 8 of us, that got in line to meet him to get an autograph. And I'm sitting there like a little fanboy holding my Black and Blue record, super excited to meet Jamie St. James since I love them so much. And this lady that was behind me in line, she asked me, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, this is," and I showed her the record, Black and Blue, a picture of Jamie St. James on the back. And so she's like, "Oh, that's cool, whatever." And then, so we're sitting there and I'm talking to somebody else. And a few minutes later, her boyfriend comes up to her in line. And I hear them talking, and she goes, "Look, that guy's got a record. That was Warrant before they were called Warrant." And I heard that and I thought, she is so wrong, just totally wrong. And I didn't bother telling her that she was wrong. But what occurred to me in that moment is that most people just don't care. Because if you're watching this channel, if you follow this channel and you watch these videos, you're one of the people kind of like me where it matters to you. You know the facts and the figures and the names and the history, and you get into that stuff and you kind of nerd out on it. But we are a very unusual, odd group of people because most people don't care and don't care enough to even bother to know the difference. We would think, doesn't anybody know that Janie Lane is the singer for Warrant and this guy's not, and this is not, and all these details of who was what and where and when, and most people just don't know. And we think that everybody does, but they just don't. And where you start seeing more and more of this kind of thing was when Steve Perry left Journey. Now, even a guy as big and as important as the name Steve Perry, who even had that solo album that sold so well, most people, when they hear that Journey's coming to town, they don't even realize that Arnell, and it seems so foreign that they wouldn't know this, but they don't realize that he's a couple of generations away from Steve Perry as the singer. Now they might know that oh yeah, that's right, Steve Perry was the original singer and this isn't the original guy, but here's the thing, they just don't care. And as long as most people, the general public, doesn't care, it isn't, these bands will just continue to be able to go do this. Now, I'm the kind of guy that goes, hey man, if you can put on a good show and you can get people to show up, more power to you. Whatever. Me, I struggle with this. Like I said, I'm going to go see Queensryche tonight, but I struggle with it a little bit because I was into Queensryche here, and Queensryche means something. And I saw them on the Empire tour when they played Operation Mindcrime from start to finish. And so, and I can name the members of the band and I know who was on, and I have all the records and I can talk about it and have some sort of idea of the history and where it came from and what it all means. But most people, it just doesn't matter to them. And so then I start asking myself, well, okay, but it asks a bigger question. And this is where I really would love to get your feedback on this. Because if you're watching this, again, you're one of those unusual people that actually cares about this stuff, where most of the world just doesn't. I mean, there'll be a bunch of people seeing Queensryche tonight at this show that don't have the slightest idea that Jeff Tate is not on that stage as the singer. They just won't know. And it seems so impossible that they wouldn't understand this, but they just don't. It's kind of like when Kiss was on their tour and Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer were in the Spaceman and the Catman makeup and costumes, but most people just go, it's Kiss. And they just don't know, and they just don't understand, which seems so foreign, but most people just don't know. They just hear a name, they know a band is playing, and they just go to see them. Now, to me, the more I think about this, I think one of the key issues is the voice. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because I remember when I saw an interview with Neil Schon talking about Journey and when Steve Perry left the band. And Neil Schon said something in this interview along the lines of, well, there was a Journey before Steve Perry and there's going to be a Journey after Steve Perry, kind of like dismissing the need to have a guy like Steve Perry around. But then, interestingly, they didn't replace Steve Perry with somebody that had a unique flavor and a unique direction. He replaced Steve Perry with people that sound exactly like Steve Perry. And Arnel, who's singing with him now, Arnel Pineda, I think is his last name, who they found from the Philippines, why is he in the band? Why? One reason, because he sounds exactly like Steve Perry. And so when you hear Neil Schon say, well, there's one before Steve Perry and one after, actually, not really, because of the fact that you're filling Steve Perry's shoes with another voice that sounds exactly like Steve Perry. There've only been a couple of situations in the past where somebody has replaced a singer with somebody that didn't sound exactly like the singer and actually was able to succeed or didn't even try to replace him with somebody that sounded exactly like him. Because when you look at Kelly Hansen, the one I was talking about earlier, that's been singing for Foreigner, he originally sang for a heavy metal band called Hurricane. And they had this one hit, I think it was called I'm On To You or something like that, which I loved that song. And the guy had the huge voice. But when he's singing Foreigner stuff, he sounds exactly like Lou Gramm. Why? Because people, when they go listen to it, they want to hear Lou Gramm. And somehow, it's that sound of the voice that matters to people. The only couple of examples where you can think of where that wasn't true, and maybe more of you can think of other things, but the real obvious ones to me were AC/DC and Van Halen. Because when AC/DC brought in Brian Johnson, replacing Bon Scott, didn't really sound like Bon Scott. If they wanted to get somebody to sound like Bon Scott, they would have gotten Mark Storace from Crocus. He sounded like Bon Scott. But they didn't. They brought in Brian Johnson, who had his own sound, his own direction, and they created something new that actually worked. And the same thing with Van Halen. When they lost David Lee Roth, they didn't try to replace him with somebody that sounded like David Lee Roth. Obviously, they bring in Sammy Hagar, who's his own, he's his own entity. He's his own thing. But most of the time, they don't do that. They bring somebody in that fills the shoes that will sound a lot like, again, like I said, Foreigner is a great example. The guy when Kelly Hansen's singing, and God bless him, Kelly Hansen's got an incredible voice. He's amazing, but in that Foreigner stuff, and to me, sounds just like Lou Gramm. And same thing with Arnel Pineda for Journey. They picked him. Why? Because he sounds exactly like Steve Perry. And then the videos that I've seen of the stuff that Queensryche's doing now, Todd sounds a lot like he's filling the role of Jeff Tate, and he sounds a lot like Jeff Tate. Now, but again, there's a bigger discussion to have here, and I didn't mean to spend so much time on this, but somehow the connection to the music happens through the voice. And somehow we as human beings, that sound is what connects us. It's like the gateway into the music. And as long as that thing sounds familiar to us, then the rest of it kind of fits into place, which then brings me all the way back to the original question. when does a band stop being a band? Because so many groups, we mentioned Quiet Riot in one of the videos a couple of days ago. There's not really, if you go back to the foundations of Quiet Riot, there are no members of Quiet Riot left anymore. And it does feel a little bit weird, especially primarily because the singer's not the same. And there's something about that when you lose the vocalist, the singer. And I think to a lot of people, that one thing makes a huge difference. When you lose that, even if you lose the person, as long as you keep the sound. And I'm not saying this is the way I feel about it, but in some weird, kind of almost animalistic way, it does resonate with me similarly. Where if I hear that thing, that familiar sound, that voice, then the rest of it feels more okay. And you can see a lot of groups where you have this kind of thing. One of them is a great example of this is the band The Cure. I mean, really, the only person in that band that has been in that band from the beginning is Robert Smith. And that band today is basically Robert Smith and a bunch of other people. And no one really cares anymore. Once they lost a couple of the original people way back, it just didn't matter anymore. But what really matters, it's that guy's voice. And I think I told that story before when I saw them in concert that time, and they just, his voice just, it's again, there's something about that where it connects, people connect into it. But it is this really interesting question, though, because when you think about, I'm just going to add one other thing, and then I'm going to get to this article, because I think if you're a Queensrÿche fan, you're going to find this interesting. But one other thing that's worth bringing into this discussion is you hear a lot of times people talking about the music business, and you realize that this right here, this album, the reason it exists is because there's a business behind it. I mean, look right here, EMI. They're the ones that took this, basically what was kind of a demo, an EP demo that they had made, and then they printed it, and then they sold a bunch, and then they sold more and more. I think it ended up being like 50,000 or something, and then EMI just picked it up as is and put it out. But it's a business. EMI is a business. And it's interesting looking at this from that standpoint then. Because think about this whole thing from a business standpoint. Like Apple. Like a lot of people watching this channel and watching this video right now probably own an iPhone. Is Apple still Apple when Steve Jobs is gone? Because Steve Jobs was kicked out of that company a long time ago. And then Apple started to sink. And then they brought Steve Jobs back in, and then it took back off. Now, Steve Jobs is gone, obviously. And you could even argue that the innovation and everything's changed and maybe isn't as great because Steve Jobs isn't there. And so there's this question of, well, as long as you're putting out a product that matches, or you carry on the thing that he'd created, it's still Apple, right? Even though the people that founded it are no longer there? It's an interesting question because this is a business. Queensryche is a business. Now, the next one is, what about a sports team like the Broncos? Now, I'm from Denver, Colorado. Who is the Denver Broncos? First time I started paying attention to the Denver Broncos, it was Craig Morton and Red Miller. That was, he was the coach, and then Craig Morton was the quarterback. I think that was his name. But then the next thing you know, it's John Elway. And John Elway is the one that, Craig Morton took him to a Super Bowl, but then John Elway takes him to a couple Super Bowls. So is the Broncos John Elway and then that group of people? Because not a single person that was in the Broncos when Craig Morton took him to the Super Bowl, obviously long gone. What about the Super Bowl John Elway? They didn't even have the same uniform at that point. They changed the helmet. They changed the whole outfit. Are they still the Broncos? And what about after that when Peyton Manning is the Broncos quarterback? Is that still the Broncos? Broncos is just a business. Again, similar thing. How is this different than the Broncos? Can you still have the Denver Broncos and have this rotating cast of people that as people age out and they bring new people in and carry on the same, it's still the same name, Anyway, it's an interesting discussion to have, to go, when does Queensryche stop being Queensryche? So again, I'm going to be seeing him this evening, and the last time I saw him was when they were touring Promised Land, and it was still the core band at that point, but it's been quite a while. It was the late 90s when DeGarmo left, and then it was over a decade ago when Jeff Tate's been gone. And so now we have this whole new lineup, people carrying on, playing the same music, putting out their new music. And it's almost, and there is something to say, if the new members can put out something meaningful, where they have a real stamp on it rather than just carrying the flame forward, it seems to mean more. For example, when you look back at AC/DC and Van Halen, the examples that I gave earlier, when they came in, these new singers, they stepped it up. They put their own stamp on it. They added things to the repertoire of that band that became really important and even timeless parts of the history of that group. Kind of like going back to Craig Morton and John Elway and Peyton Manning. They took them to the Super Bowl, so it became a meaningful part of it. And so you start asking yourself, perhaps what makes a band or have the same thing is if they add something meaningful to the name. If the new CEO of a big company comes in and replaces the old one, and they bring something that adds to the legacy, to the meaning of that, they enhance it in some way rather than just carrying the torch forward. Maybe there's something to that too. Anyway, I think we need to have more discussions about this. I'll get Gary in here sometime and maybe a couple other people and go through this. But I'd really, if you're still watching this at this point, I would love to get your feedback on that and put some things down in the comments, because I think we can use those things as a launching point for more discussions about this very issue. What does it really matter? Again, to most people watching this channel, it'll matter to you because you're the kind of person that gets into the nerdy stuff like I do. But realizing that we are a very odd group of people when it comes to this kind of stuff. Most people will go to a Kiss concert and they just don't care because it's Kiss, it's the makeup, whatever. And it's just the brand, and the brand carries on. But then you've got people like me in the background going, man, this is so hard to watch because it's not Ace, it's Tommy, and Tommy's supposed to be in black and blue. This doesn't make sense. The world this is not normal. This is not right. So you kind of you get over it, and you're right. Anyway, that's my little bit of weirdness in this whole thing. But so anyway, I'm going to go see them tonight. Saw them a long, long time ago. When I saw them on the Empire tour, that's probably one of my fondest memories because they were huge at that point. I mean, they were such a big deal. And it was cool to see this band who I'd gotten into before a lot of people even knew who they were kind of become giant, and then to go see them in that big arena when I did. And the band, it's interesting because I was thinking about this earlier, and I'm going to get to this real quick. You can skip forward if this is boring you, obviously, but the band that opened up was a band called, and I remember this now, because they weren't the ones that opened for him through part of this tour, but I think on the one time that we saw Queensryche, the band was Warrior Soul. Do any of you remember Warrior Soul? For whatever reason, I loved them as an opening group. I loved the music. I think that was who it was. Anyway, I went out and bought their Drugs, God, and the New Republic, I think is what the CD was called, and just loved it. Now, they put out stuff after that I bought that I didn't think was that great, but that album was so good. If you remember Warrior Soul, I'd love to hear about it because they were pretty cool. Anyway, so what I found here, and the reason Michael Wilton, again, the reason I found this article specifically about him is because he is one of the guys in the band today that's kind of left over from the classic Queensryche that we all knew and loved way back when. And this is kind of an interesting little article, and just a couple things that, for whatever reason, I just didn't know about his history. So this is from the Sun Stewart News, July 12th, 1991. And let's see here. So, and it's just a picture of him, Michael Wilton. And by the way, I will when I'm at the show tonight. I know we have a bunch of people that follow this channel that are down in Vegas. I know that because you've contacted us because you're relatively close to where we are. I'm going to probably put down in the comments, or maybe the first comments are down in the notes. The studio here has a texting line, and I'll take it with me. So if you text the studio. Because if you're going to be at the concert or around, I'd love to meet you, hook up, say hi, whatever. So message me down there. If you happen to be at the show, I don't know if anybody that's watching this obviously will be, but I'd love to hook up with you if you happen to be around and just say hi. So here we go. This is the Stewart News, July 12th, 1991, on page 35. And the title, the reason this one got me, and I saw the name Michael Wilton, I thought, oh, this is going to be cool. It says, "Old Friend Makes It Big." And what this is this is somebody that knew Michael Wilton when they were young. Apparently they were in a band together, and then he turns out to be this, I guess, reporter at this newspaper or something, writes this article where he goes and meets him. And it was kind of cool to read this. So I think you'll like this. So this is July 12th, 1991. The last time I had seen Michael Wilton playing guitar was in the basement of a Bellevue, Washington home more than 12 years ago. That was before I saw him and his hard rock band Queensryche captivate a near-capacity crowd at the Miami Arena last week. The band is perched on the edge of enormous success, currently grinding out an exhausting national tour to support their platinum album, Empire. And that was amazing, because I think Empire was 2 or 3 times platinum, which was incredible. You know, for those of us that have been fans of Queensryche from the beginning, because we saw something amazing in this group, to see them, to see the whole world kind of finally figure out, like, wow, these guys are great. This is great stuff. And then to see them, selling multi-platinum on that album, which then lifted albums like this one up past the gold status. Rock critics have been raving about the band's live performances, an act that both provokes and entertains. I went to the Miami concert to get an interview with Wilton, an old friend and bandmate back in our high school garage band playing days. I played bass in a band with Wilton when he was 15 and I was 17. We attended the same high school and played together in basements and garages in Bellevue, where we both grew up. I was wondering if success had changed him, if the growing fame had colored his personality. I remembered Wilton as a musician who loved classical guitar, jazz, and blues as much as he loved to crank up the volume and belt out the latest riff he had learned from albums by Led Zeppelin, Rush, or Van Halen. Quiet, intense, and friendly, Wilton preferred to let his guitar do the talking. We went our separate ways after I graduated from high school in 1978. Wilton continued to play the guitar and jam with friends, including fellow Queensryche guitarist Chris DeGarmo. They formed a band called Joker. In 1981, Wilton and DeGarmo created a new band, Queensryche, joined by Jeff Tate. And by the way, there was another one in there called The Mob, which they don't mention here, but that was what the group was called before this. Joined by Jeff Tate, Scott Rockenfield, and Eddie Jackson, they ignored the dance club circuit for the solitude of the garage. There they wrote their own music and crafted their own sound. It took the band 10 years to gain a national and international following, to get heavy exposure on MTV, and to sell gold and platinum albums. Now, they're riding the crest of a wave of commercial success. And that is pretty fascinating. I mean, I bought this in 83, and here we were, in 91 when they were touring on Empire, and they were just the biggest thing. And they had those few albums in between, and they'd been, growing little by little, but man, they were getting played on MTV. I mean, just remember seeing Jet City Woman and Empire and Silent Lucidity. I mean, that stuff was just getting played constantly during that period. Let's see here. Wilton and Queensryche illustrate how hard work, talent, and dedication into excellence can pay off in the world of rock music without leading to a fame-crazed lifestyle. It was refreshing when I talked to Wilton, but really no surprise, to see that the diminutive, quiet guitar slinger from Interlake High School was a bright and serious human being unaffected by his fame. And it's interesting also to think about that, because this was one of those groups that seemed that way. They seemed in that way, they seemed a little bit more like what you would expect from Rush, just a little bit nerdy and not so much the crazy party stuff that you would get from like a Def Leppard. You know, you know the stories on their Hysteria tour, all that stuff. And when Queensryche was that big, you just couldn't imagine that same thing happening. They just seemed more nerdy in some way, like Rush again. Wilton is not only a dedicated guitarist, but a family man, dedicated to the well-being of his 2-year-old daughter despite the demanding touring schedule that has kept him away from his Seattle home for 8 months. 2 years old, so that you're talking about a kid that's 30 now. That's funny to think about, because I've got kids, you know, that age too, so it's interesting. Just interesting to think about the aging, you know, all of us aging together like that. In fact, Wilton joked that he had been gone from home so long that he was wondering how his rhododendrons were faring. He had planted them before the tour had begun. It's just, anyway, just funny hearing this stuff. Quote, "I didn't even get to see them bloom," unquote, he said. Wilton still seems like a regular guy, even though the long curly black hair and glittery rock wardrobe gives an entirely different impression. He still has diverse musical tastes that go beyond rock music, and he reads. He currently is reading Are You Psychic by Pete Sanders Jr., in addition to daily newspapers and books on trends and social issues. "I still listen to jazz a lot," he said. "Coltrane and Charlie Parker, all the classics. I go through my moods. I listen to classical guitar a lot. It depends on the mood I'm in, but I don't listen to country or rap music." Sounds interesting. Wilton says he didn't get into music just to become a rock star. He's in it to create music, as are the other band members. "I don't know what a rock star is," he said. "I'm probably more normal than most people. I can relate to just about anybody who has an open mind. I don't have an inflated ego or anything, and I doubt if I ever will, even if I make some money." That's funny to hear, even if I make some money, because here they were almost 10 years into their career, 8 years since putting this, you know, album out on a major label. And even if I make some money, and here they were selling platinum albums, and you start to understand how challenging it is in the music industry. Music and the freedom to create are what motivates Wilton. Music was very important to him as a teenager, as important as sports and school. But his love affair with music began in tragedy. Now this part right here, for whatever reason, I never knew this story. So this is the first time I actually heard this when I read this article. Quote, "I had an uncle who played bass in a band in Oakland, and he was tragically killed in a motorcycle accident," he said. "I inherited his bass equipment, and I basically learned how to play bass first. Then my aunt gave me a classical guitar. I learned by ear, and I went to music classes in high school," he said. This was, of course, in addition to playing in various garage bands. "After high school, I went to the Cornish Institute of Music in Seattle for a year and a half before I ran out of money. At that school, I learned theory, composition, classical guitar, piano, all aspects of music." Quote, "Everything is based out of the subconscious," he explained. "I don't sit there and put a staff in front of me and compose musical notes. I hear it in my head and go from there." Parental support helped as he developed and refined his skills on the guitar, he said. His parents, leery at first about his dream of playing in a rock band, wanted him to get a good education and keep an open mind. How many of us heard those same things? Now, keep an open mind, make sure you get an education. But once they saw how dedicated I was, they were very supportive, he said. Quote, "I think anybody needs that kind of support when they're trying to reach a goal, whatever it might be," he said. "It's nice to have that family support. I was just fortunate, I guess. I think everything happens for a reason," he added. "I could have done other things. I could have been an architect, something creative. You have your intuitiveness, your instinct. It steered me this way. I couldn't work in a bank at a 9-to-5 job. I'm an intuitive person, a right-dominated brain living in a left-dominated world," unquote. Wilton offered no easy shortcuts for aspiring musicians who want to succeed in the music business. Quote, "Everybody has these dreams and goals," he said, "and if you stay with them as intensely as I did, eventually you'll reach them in some fashion. If you live and breathe your desires, they'll happen. I just like to enjoy life, and I'm very optimistic," he went on. "I try to feed off the good people the good in people rather than the negativity. Negativity brings your energy level down. That's just an interesting thing to hear him say. Negativity brings your energy level down. To know Wilton is to know what makes Queensryche tick. The band's lyrics provoke the young audience into thinking. By the way, it's kind of a true and important thing. I mean, two of the songs on this album, Night Rider and Blinded, Michael Wilton was partly responsible for writing those songs. And if you go back, go to the other albums, you'll see his name under writing credit all over the place. I think for me, a lot of times I think of DeGarmo and Jeff Tate as being kind of the core songwriters, but not necessarily. Michael Wilton was heavily involved in a lot of the songwriting here. So there's a lot of truth to what he said here. Make Queensryche tick. The band's lyrics provoke the young audience into thinking and questioning about society and the direction in which it's going. According to Wilton, Queensryche is not about money and materialism. They are about music and art and humanity. Said Wilton, quote, "We're not in it for the money. We're in it to make a mark in history as a band doing our own unique blend of songs," unquote. And that is an interesting way to end the article, because they really did create a mark in the industry. I mean, when you just look at Operation Mindcrime alone, there are a lot of people that look at that and think that might be, that's one of the greatest concept albums ever made. And there's a lot of people that will tell you it's the greatest metal concept album ever made. And I know people argue with me about that. And I'm not even necessarily saying it. I'm just saying that there are a lot of people that believe that. That's the kind of mark that they left, that even to this day, there are people interested in that album and talking about it, looking back on that was something really, really important. And this too, this EP, the impact that this had on so many people, and what Queensryche created over those years, building up that following, creating this sound, kind of making, taking their own course, doing their own thing, and impacting so many people and so many musicians along the way, that when he says that make a mark in history as a band doing our own unique blend of songs, I actually think they succeeded in that. They were risk takers. They did very unique things. They tried things that no other people were really doing, and they made it work. So anyway, it's going to be interesting for me to go and experience this. The last time I saw them was on the Promised Land tour, which would have been what back in the early 90s. I saw them in I think that was in Colorado on that one. When I saw them on the Empire tour, it was in Salt Lake City, but I believe I had moved to Denver by then. And anyway, but I was a huge Jeff Tate fan. I thought he was such a great presenter on stage, had a very, very unique personality. And so it'll be interesting to see Todd. I've seen videos online, but I've never actually been to one of these concerts to see what it's like. So this would be kind of a fun experience just to go see it. And Slaughter's opening up. And Steve Adler, I think he's opening up or has a group that's playing before that. But since we actually did a video on Slaughter not long ago too. So it'll be cool now for me to go see this, and then I'll make a video in the next day or two just kind of talking about my experience, and in case anybody's curious. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you're going to be around down there. I'd love to hook up, love to meet you, and we'll be at that show, and I'll put some comment on the video. You can get our email address off on our website, off the audiomover.com website. There's texting. There's all kinds of ways to get a hold of us, and I'd love to visit with you. So anyway, be sure and follow the channel, like the video, leave your comments, of course. I'd love to get your feedback on that whole discussion that I was having earlier, because I think it's going to be something, as time goes on, it's going to become a bigger and bigger thing to talk about. So I'd love to get your feedback on that. Oh, and one other thing before I wrap up, I've got something that came in the mail, and if this is what I think it is, it should be. Thought I'd share this with you. Yes, this is what I think it is. This is gonna this is gonna be fun. So if this fits, I will probably wear this tonight. So there you go. Our first Audiomover for the channel, our first Audiomover t-shirt. I've got another one coming that says, "Have yourself a fantastic day," but this is our Audiomover, moving the past into the awesome. So if it fits, I'll probably be wearing this tonight. And if you're interested in getting any of these, we actually have a bunch of different types of t-shirts. And you can just go to audiomover.com. That's where they're for sale. A lot of times they'll be listed down below the video too. You can see some of the things we have available. Anyway, that's a great way to support the channel if you're interested in that kind of thing. And anyway, with that, have yourself a fantastic day.